All right, Year 12 Global Politics. Right now, I'm going to talk you through the challenges that we have to resolving the issue of climate change. So that's our key knowledge, the challenges. And the skill is to analyze. Now, analyze really means that we need to break it down. So I've tried to come up with some questions to help us break it down. So when you're writing a short answer response or even essay paragraph, when talking about the challenges, make sure that you are ticking off these things. The first is, what gets in the way of resolving the issue? So it might be, climate change denial. What does it look like in the world? So that's really like your example, examples from current day society. How have we tried to address this challenge? Or where have we tried to address the challenge? So, it may be that they've tried to alter the language around climate change denial, tried to address that issue, and how and why is that still a challenge today? So, why is this still being an issue? What's happened? I'm not going to talk about every single challenge when it comes to climate change denial and the other challenges that we may look at, such as national interest. But yeah, there's lots of different challenges that we are going to there's probably more than what I'm going to talk about with you guys today. So the first challenge I'm going to discuss is climate change denial. I think this one is a great challenge to talk about because it's very relevant to lots of countries, and particularly with the rise of the right-wing groups who are skeptical of climate change and also don't trust authorities. So yeah, that's a massive issue. But anyway, the challenge is climate change denial, which has weakened our ability and will to act. So some of you may be thinking, well, what is even climate change denial? It's when people will deny, dismiss, or have unwarranted doubts that contradict the scientific consensus on climate change. A main part of the denial is that a lot of climate change skeptics don't think that humans have caused climate change, or they just kind of say, oh, well, the earth has always got warm because that's global warming. The earth gets warmer. It's like, yes, but the increased amount has been because of fossil fuels. And we have, because of the Industrial Revolution, we have seen an increase in our, fossil fuels because that's how we get economic growth. But anyway, they deny or question the extent to which humans have caused it, its effects on nature and human society, or the potential of adaptation to global warming by human actions. So, in terms of its effect on nature, there was a lot of, climate change skeptics were, unsure or even really did question whether the bushfires in 2020 were caused by climate change. A number of right-wing politicians in Australia questioned whether or not that was actually because of it. So this is what climate change denial actually means. In terms of how it's an issue, in Australia, it's an issue because we've seen, 8% of our population identify themselves as deniers, and that is more than the global average of 3%. In Australia, we have an issue with the climate. We've seen an increase in extreme weather events. They've actually happened in Australia. The bushfires is a great example of that. But the issue is that these climate change deniers or skeptics don't think that the bushfires were caused by, there's not a link between the bushfires and climate change. So that's a problem when we have people that don't believe that exists. And in terms of why do we have an issue with climate change denial and why do people think this? And it's mainly because of the influence of our news organizations. Murdoch media has promoted a lot of denial or skepticism before it. You know, like people like Andrew Bolt on Sky News, you know, they are partly part of the issue, and also the influence of News Corp. So people who generally consume the news from Sky News or News Corp will be given the message that climate change isn't as big of an issue as what we think it is, and that, you know, it's has not caused the damage that it has. So to put that again into more perspective, you know, nearly 30% of Sky News readers, you know, 30% of them don't believe climate change is a serious issue. So, and the news that they're consuming is exacerbating that issue. It is a challenge to combat climate change denial, because a lot of those skeptics also don't trust the news, as in maybe their regular news or even, you know, news from other outlets. And the news that they are actually consuming, you know, from Sky News and from News Corp is promoting this alternative agenda. So really, climate change denial is making the issue worse because it's feeding people misinformation. So in terms of how people have tried to combat it, Scott Morrison said that the coalition has never made the connection that, has always made the connection that humans and fossil fuels have contributed to climate change, and that has never been in dispute. So he has tried to emphasize that there is a link, and that we don't, you know, that humans have caused climate change, really. Oops. Whoa. Ah. Oh, gosh. Sorry. Okay. Oh, no. Oh, gosh. Sorry. You know, that humans have caused climate change. So he has tried to change his language to suggest that this is still an issue. However, there are still MPs in government that are still perpetuating this idea that climate change is not real, or that bushfires were not caused by climate change. And these people include, you know, Craig Kelly, you know, Barnaby Joyce, and, you know, these people are promoting an alternative narrative. And so we are going to continue to see inaction when we don't see complete bipartisan support. So until okay, it doesn't want to go, until MPs change their tune, that until they stop believing that bushfires were not caused by climate change, we aren't going to see a change. So the narrative there needs to change. Oh dear. I don't know how to get rid of that. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. That's really awkward. Anyway, I will continue. We've got here, just ignore what was here below. Okay. So another challenge is the issue of national interests. Again, we've seen this across, the issue of terrorism. We've seen it in the ethical debate of people movement and human rights. So it's a challenge really to lots of different issues across our course. And to give you, again, a little refresher, in case you've forgotten, national interest is about what's best for the state. All states will have different ideas, but most commonly it's about economic prosperity. And so states may be reluctant to do anything about climate change because it's going to affect their economic prosperity. So, for example, in Australia, we rely very heavily on mining, and it contributes to 10.4% of the Australian economy. The largest contributor also of GDP with $202 billion. So this is kind of how it looks in Australia. You know, we export a lot of these fossil fuels. We produce a lot of coal. So although we need to phase out coal to limit global warming, it plays a massive role in our economy. So therefore, you know, we haven't introduced policies that are about cutting back on coal. You know, the emissions reduction fund doesn't involve cutting back coal. You know, it says that we need to reduce emissions and is going to pay companies that do that and that, you know, that do those things. But, you know, we haven't actually seen any changes really there about coal. Also, in the Paris Climate Agreement, you know, they have put in there that states need to have nationally determined targets or nationally determined contributions, where states have to set their own targets. But because there's no enforcement, it means that then some states may not agree to the highest possible reduction. And so they aren't then agreeing to completely cut their emissions or, you know, have these dramatic changes, meaning that we're not going to see as much mitigation. We're not going to see as much reduction. And so that's a challenge then in terms of resolving this crisis. So the issue here is that states such as Australia that rely heavily on coal aren't going to make policies that will be in their national interest, you know, to introduce policies that are against their national interest, because they do rely so heavily on coal and because they really, you know, there's not really in their interest to do so. Okay. Another challenge here is our key aspects. We'll talk about that in our next video, but we have key aspects that are making the issue worse. For example, resource exploitation. Because in the world we are consumers, and you know, as part of being in a capitalist world, we have mass consumerism. You know, every time there's a new iPhone, we go out and buy it, but we forget the fact that phones actually are increasing emissions. So, you know, if the issue here is that we live in a consumerist society, and unless we introduce sustainable practices, emissions are going to continue to rise. And so we're not going to see the issue changed. Just like with national interests, until we see states not look at the short-term gain of economic prosperity, they look at the bigger picture, we're not going to really see many changes there. Adaptation and mitigation also cost money. You know, states had to contribute to the Green Climate Fund in order to help states, developing states, with their adaptation and mitigation efforts with climate change. However, because of COVID-19, a lot of countries did withdraw, and so that does make it very difficult then to try and adapt to the changes that are going to occur. So, you know, these are two challenges that you could look at. I haven't got more information there, but I'm sure you guys probably know a bit more about it from the key aspects that we're about to look at. The final challenge I will talk about is our consumerist lifestyle. So, you know, in capitalist society, we continue to consume goods. You know, we turn on all our power, so we consume a lot of electricity, heating, we all drive cars, and all these things increase our global emissions. So, you know, as we get richer, as we get more money, we have more access to the lifestyle that we want to live. And so that then results in us often using more, you know, I guess, more products that will increase our fossil fuels. So there's a strong link between CO2 emissions, economic prosperity, and the standard of living. So many countries that grow economically have done so from heavy industry, manufacturing or construction that require a large amount of energy inputs. So, that they do require a large amount of fossil fuels. So on this basis, high income countries like Europe and North America account for a large amount of global emissions. They make up 46%, and that is nearly 3 times worth what their population is. So, we see them, consuming a lot of goods, but they're not cancelling it out with, net zero emissions. So, it's not really, they're not doing enough there. We also live in a society where there's a lot of artificial demand for products. We consume more energy, and we waste more. So, that's an issue there in resolving the issue of climate change. However, we have seen changes to that. We have seen countries adapt their behaviours because of the COVID-19 situation. And so we have seen, because we haven't been able to, use our car as much, or maybe use as much heating or electricity or anything like that, we have seen a drop in global emissions. So they dropped by 17% compared to their previous year. So as a result of us taking maybe more cautious measures against the pandemic, emissions have fallen. So that's good. So in terms of this being a challenge, it's a challenge because we continue to want to grow economically, but we aren't doing maybe enough to actually cancel that out. So in terms of the challenges that we've looked at, it could be the consumerist lifestyle, the key aspects, national interests, and climate change denial or skeptics. I would encourage you to go away and think about, those questions, and, if you got an analyze question, how would you say that, the example of what this looks like and how we have tried to address that challenge? How have we tried to fix it? Have we even tried to fix it? We've climate change now, Scott Morrison has, but, it hasn't really done enough because we still see these MPs promoting a narrative that goes against what their leader of the party says. So, think about these questions when it comes to the key challenges. Again, I hope this was a helpful video, and I hope you got something out of this. If you have any questions, reach out, and thank you for listening.